Thank you, Tim, for that. I want to add my welcome to everyone here this morning. It's good to see you. We have visitors with us. It's really good to see you. We have visitors from out of the country, and they do that strange type thing. But anyway, it's we're glad you're here. So over the last through this month, this will probably illustrate to you just how closely Jeff, Paul, and I are in our thinking. Because with the lesson that Paul brought us earlier in the month, talking about transformation and mainly in serving others along those lines and the change that's required to do that. And then, of course, Jeff last week with Take Up Your Cross and introducing something a little radical in that the understanding of the definition of the word radical was used in a positive way instead of a negative way. And a radical Christian with an idea of it should all be done. It's all more than just a checklist. With what Tim just read for us this morning, and there's a couple other passages that we're going to look at, but I want to present something to you here this morning that might be a little radical itself. And that is, I want us to take a look at the word selfish, and not in the way that we normally think of being selfish. So with that, you notice, at least in the New King James Version, in Deuteronomy 4 and verse 9, and some other versions use different words, and we'll look at those in just a minute. But it says, take heed to yourself. And what does that mean, to take heed to yourself? I think where a lot of people are the most well-known take heed to yourself verse comes in Acts 20 and verse 28. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But I want to take a look at this morning for just a few minutes, hopefully just a few minutes, on what it means to take heed to yourself. We'll also look at Luke chapter 21, verse 34, and of course, as I've already mentioned, Acts 20 and 28, but also 1 Timothy 4 and verse 16. In the King James Version and the New King James Version together, in all four of those passages we just looked at, simply uses take heed. In the New American Standard, uses give heed. Give heed. Be on guard. Pay close attention. In the English, it's take care. Watch. Pay careful attention. Keep a close watch on. And these are listed in order of Deuteronomy 4, Luke 21, Acts 20, 1 Timothy 4. And then the New International uses be careful. In fact, I believe it starts off with be careful and watch, and then be careful, keep watch, or watch your life closely. So what I did is I used the different translations to give you a definition or an idea of what we're talking about when we think about take heed to yourself. Look back, if you're still in Deuteronomy 4, let's take a look at some of the spiritual responsibilities that Moses lays out to the nation of Israel. Diligently keep yourself. You notice when he started out, he said that by statutes and judgments. In verse 1, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you. That's an important point. We're going to come back to that at a little point in time as well. Diligently keep yourself. Do not forget what you've seen. Do not let it depart from your heart. Teach your children to learn to fear God. And then in verse 10 it says to teach your grandchildren as well. And we stop and think that once we teach our children and they grow up and they leave the house, our work is done as parents. No. Hopefully, with what we've taught our children, they will teach their children, which in essence is teaching your grandchildren. Well, look at it from this point as well. Grandparents still have a responsibility of teaching their grandchildren by their example, by what they say and do, what their grandchildren see in their grandparents. That's one thing that of course, I'm not as privileged as some to have my grandchildren with you in the same town, same state, whatever it may be. So I relish the times that I can spend with my grandkids. But my influence reaches about 2,500 miles. I believe that's what it is. I'm not quite sure. Those that are visiting from Tampa might be a little bit more precise on the miles that it is from there to here, but it's somewhere in that 2,000 mile range. And that's how far-reaching our example is, even beyond that. So in Deuteronomy 4, diligently keep yourself and to teach your children. And why was all this necessary? Let's turn over now, if you would, to look at Luke 21. Luke, the 21st chapter. Of course, by the way, if some of you haven't noticed, I don't need to have a reminder of my grandchildren, but I wore my tie this morning. It reminds me of my grandchildren. They're with me. Luke 21. Beginning in verse 34, we'll read through 36. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore, and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Take heed, lest your hearts be weighed down. Hopefully not with carousing, hopefully not with, but probably most often with the cares of this life. Watch therefore and pray always to be counted worthy to stand before the Son of Man. In Deuteronomy 4, Moses is instructing Israel that in order to enter the promised land, take heed to yourselves. Don't get bogged down with all of this stuff. In Luke 21, Jesus is instructing on the day that he comes back. Israel needed to be prepared to enter the promised land. Christians need to be prepared to enter heaven. And that's what I'd like to take a look at today, when it's pounded into us that we should put others ahead of ourselves, and rightfully so. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm suggesting to you is that at some times, it's okay to be a little bit selfish. And that is in the sense of taking heed to yourself. First thing we need to do is we need to know ourselves. If you would, turn to Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verses 31 through 35. Then Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered and said to him, even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. Jesus said to him, assuredly I say to you that this night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And this story is very familiar to us. But look at what comes next. And so said all the disciples. We need to know ourselves. We diligently take care of ourselves physically. But do we put that same diligence into taking care of ourselves spiritually? If we do not understand ourselves, which is in essence it's tied up in the word know, How can we understand others? You know, I've heard over the years young people at times, in fact, I don't remember, but I probably said the same thing myself. When you go up to your parents and you want to be out on your own and you use this as an excuse, I need to go find myself. How can you find what you don't know? How can you find yourself if you don't know what you're looking for? We need to know what we're looking for. We need to know who we are. Somebody comes up to you and says, Wesley, who are you? And my name's Wesley Biggs. I'm the son of Jeremy and Alma Tucker. No. Who are you? What makes you? You know, oftentimes, sorry to pick on you, thanks for being a good sport. Oftentimes, when a child does something that maybe embarrasses the parent, that never happens. And what does the parent say? Who are you? I don't even know you. This is what I'm talking about. We need to know who we are. We need to know what makes us. Oftentimes, due to peer pressure, we'll play many different roles around different people. And this isn't limited to young people. There's all kinds of stories. And sadly, years ago, it was a story of my life, where you go to work and you're one person, which is generally the real person. At home, you're a different person. And at church, or when we are assembled together, entirely different as well. We end up living 3 different lives, but we're not living. And generally, the one that defines us is the one that people see in us. And that's generally how we are when we're at work. At least that's what I've found out, just from myself and still observing others in the workplace who profess to be a certain way, but don't show it. We need to know who we are. If you would, turn over to Matthew 16. To know who we are, first and foremost, we need to be concerned. Few people understand today the need for the concern in this area. Few people today understand the responsibility that we have in this area. In Matthew 16, verse 26, another familiar passage. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Do we understand that our soul is a precious commodity to God? Do we understand that it is our responsibility to make sure that we can stand before the Son of Man? I take that back. We all will stand before him. But not all will hear, "Enter in, thou good and faithful servant." That's what I want to hear. And hopefully that's what we all want to hear. Some think they own their own heart, but in reality they really don't. We looked at that with the case of Peter and the disciples. Remember his statement? I will never. And so said all his disciples. And we know what happened. Did they truly know themselves? They thought they did. To truly know one's own heart isn't easy. It's never easy. In Jeremiah 17, verse 9, says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So if we can't know our own heart, what's the use? What's the purpose? Why do we bother? Well, look at Proverbs 4, verse 23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Now, if you would, turn back over to the book of Deuteronomy. This time we'll look in chapter 8. We come to fully know who we are. We come to fully know our own hearts when we've been tested. That's when the true you, or the true me, shows through. In Deuteronomy 8, the first 3 verses, every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. When you're tested, what do people see? I remember some years ago, a lady in the congregation here. In our, those of you that may not be familiar, our old building is just a stone's throw east of here. And in that, out in the parking lot, of course, there's a basement in that building, and there isn't in this one. But if there's a basement, of course, you have window wells. And we didn't have coverings over those window wells, if you remember. And a young boy, 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, somewhere in there, they were outside playing, as kids do, and he tripped, and he fell down the window well. And out of the mouth of the mother came some words that I thought that I would never hear from her. Who are you when you're tested? Take heed to yourself. But not just to know ourselves, we need to examine ourselves. A lot of times this is associated with the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians 16. But if you would, turn over to 2 Corinthians 13. Second Corinthians 13 and verse 5. Examine yourself as to whether you're in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you? Unless indeed you are disqualified. We need to examine ourselves. And that examination comes through testing. But that doesn't mean that we can't stand in front of the mirror and go, Rob, who are you? And I don't mean in the sense that everybody knows my name. I'm married to Dana. Jessica and Chelsea are my daughters, so on and so forth. I work at Arnold Machinery. I'm over 50. Things like that. We need to examine ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, is my heart right with God? Is my life right with God? Turn over to the book of 1 Chronicles, if you would. 1 Chronicles, the 28th chapter, verse 9. First Chronicles 28, verse 9. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father and serve him with a loyal heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. That's a good question that we need to ask ourselves at least 1,000 times a day. Is my life right with God? What I'm doing right now, what I'm engaging in, the way that I'm speaking, would God be pleased with that? There are times when some deep soul searching is definitely in order. If we think we can please God by just hearing his word, we deceive ourselves. Guess where I'm going, Art? Hearing his word, deceiving ourselves. James chapter 1. The only reason I bring up Art is Art loves to try to figure out where I'm going with something by the verses that I use. And it's kind of a game, and it's a fun one to play. So thank you, Art. I enjoy doing that. He loves to stump me. Reverse is also true. In James 1, 22 through 25, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and is not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For if he observes himself, goes away and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. We're talking about standing in front of the mirror. We do that when we come to services. Well, actually, we do that every morning when we get ready. We stand in front of a mirror. What do we see? Yes, there's going to be a perfect reflection. But does that show who you really are? That's why we need to have some deep soul searching every now and then, especially when times of indifference may appear. And it is so easy to fall into the trap of indifference, or apathy, if you will. Is just hearing the word enough? I'll ask you to answer that. Just coming here 3-4 times a week, is that enough? Jeff talked about that a little bit last week. Is it enough? Are we really considering ourselves and paying close attention to our spiritual growth if we hear the word? You ever heard the expression, goes in one ear and out the other? That's kind of the image that pops into my mind when I think about this. And there again, brethren, I stand before you today and admit there was a time in my life when that exact thing happened. I would come here, I'd listen, I'd smile, I'd shake everybody's hand. I'd say, oh boy, how, look at us. And the minute I walked out that door, whoop, gone. Take heed to yourself. Will Rogers once said, even though you're on the right track, if you don't move, you're going to get run over. We need to be moving. We need to be moving in our spiritual growth. We need to be moving in the spreading of the gospel and reaching out to others. If you would, turn over to Revelation chapter 3. It's something that's very familiar. We had a lectureship on it not too long ago, and that's one of the churches, the 7 churches of Asia. In Revelation 3, the church of Laodicea. I think we're all familiar with what it says there. It says, beginning in verse 15, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Let us not be hearers only. Let us be hearers and doers. And then the third thing we need to do, besides know and examine ourselves, And this is probably the toughest one of them all. We need to control ourselves. What are you talking about? I'm in control. I'm always in control. Right? Everybody in here this morning in control of themselves? Of themselves? However the grammatically proper way of saying that is. Is everybody in control? Who controls your life? There's only one person that controls your life. Living person. And that's you. We are the masters of our own destiny. We control our lives. What we choose, what we decide, controls our lives. What we choose, what we decide, shapes us. And in that, we need to control our thoughts. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 4. I won't turn over there and read that. There's a couple other things that I'd like to get to, and I've already gabbed way too much this morning. I don't have much time left. We have to control our thoughts. We need to control our tongues. James 1, verse 26. We need to control our actions. Ephesians 5, 3 through 7. And I put the verses up there. If you would like to write them down, feel free to do so. There's an expression that actions speak louder than words. So consider this expression. Can someone say to you, I can't hear your words because your actions deafen me? In other words, are you doing what you say you are doing? If you say, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, but in your actions, thou shalt do, then your actions deafen your words. And the only thing that is going to be remembered is your actions over your words. In Matthew 7, verse 16, we will turn over there. Matthew 7, verse 16, we are known by what we do. What we do defines us. Jesus said in Matthew 7, verse 16, you will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? You can't say, I got a fig from that thorn bush. It ain't going to work. And you can't tell me it does. Then the last thing that we need to do, jumped ahead of myself a little bit. We need to control our influence. Turn over to 2 Corinthians 3. 2 Corinthians 3, talking about how people read us by what we do. You ever heard that expression as well? I'm an open book. Or my life is an open book. Really? Is that something you want to be proud of all the time? Because people can read us by our actions. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 2 through 3. You are our epistle written in our hearts, known and read by all men. Clearly you are an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh, that is, of the heart. I would dearly love to have Paul tell me, you are our epistle written in our hearts, known and read by all men. Sometimes I fear that is true. But the fear part of it is it the kind of book that I want people to read? Everyone knows what happens when you throw a rock or a stone into a pond. That one little rock makes a splash, but then the effect of that splash reaches the opposite shore. Small pond. Large pond, it may not reach the opposite shore, but you get the idea. Our actions are far-reaching. What is the gospel according to you? In our songbooks, there's a song. It's entitled The World's Bible. It's number 788 in our songbooks. The first two verses go like this. Christ has no hands but our hands to do his work today. He has no feet but our feet to lead men in his way. He has no tongue but our tongues to tell men how he died. He has no help but our help to bring them to his side. We are the only Bible the careless world will read. We are the sinner's gospel. We are the scoffer's creed. We are the Lord's last message given in deed and word. What if the type is crooked? What if the print is blurred? And then finally, we need to improve ourselves. All Christians need to seek to improve themselves. And unfortunately, usually, there's plenty of room in this area. Paul, a strong Christian, to say the least, he kept pressing on in Philippians 3, verses 13 and 14. We all know what he said there. I press on toward the mark of the prize of the high calling of God. I press on. Even though Paul was a strong Christian, very strong, he understood the need to press on. He understood the need to improve himself. So how do we improve ourselves? What I'd like to suggest to you this morning are a few paradoxes. Some paradoxes that are found in the Bible about a Christian's character, Christian's growth. Consider this. We conquer by yielding. Romans 6. We find rest under a yoke. Matthew 11. We find our life by losing it. We reign by serving. We are made great by being the least. We are exalted by being humble. We become wise by becoming fools. We are made free by becoming bondservants. We wax strong by being weak. And you can read the verses next to them there. We triumph by defeat. And then finally, we live by dying. Consider these. These are what necessary in our lives. So as we consider others and put them ahead of us, let's make sure that us is what it's supposed to be. Take heed to yourself. Not too long ago, in fact, it was just a few weeks ago, around the middle of June, maybe the third week of June, the company that I work for celebrated a major milestone, 90th anniversary of being in business. And in that celebration, they invited a guest speaker to come and speak for them. Some of you may recognize this name, some of you may not. Thurl Bailey. Thurl Bailey played for the Utah Jazz in the early 80s to the mid-90s. But as what happens to a lot of the older players in basketball and in most sports, baseball, their services are no longer required in the NBA, and so they fall to the allure of playing in Europe, and which was happened to Thurl. and he went to play in Europe. It was in the late 90s, and he was relaying an incident that took place. And when you go from one country to another in Europe, from what I've never done it. I've only gone out of the country once, and that was by flight into Canada, but it was just Vancouver. There are some things that happen at the border, and he had to play a game in a different country from where he was, and so he was driving and he came to the border. And I don't know if anybody has traveled in Europe. I know my daughter and son-in-law recently did. But when you travel and you come to the border guards, there's basically 3 questions they ask. Where did you come from? What is your purpose? Where are you going? Turn over to Romans 6, verse 22. So as we conclude our lesson here this morning, here's my question for you. When we take heed of ourselves, let's never forget where we came from. In Romans 6 and verse 22, but now, having been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, you have your fruit to holiness and the end, everlasting life. What is your purpose? You know, a lot of times, I talked about how the young people, they say, I need to go find myself. But what's becoming maybe more prevalent today is the question, who am I? I remember that question, if I remember correctly, back in my younger years when I was looking at Dr. Seuss. Who am I? Who am I? I have been set free. That's who I am. I have been set free. And those of you that maybe have never experienced freedoms being controlled, which a lot of us in the United States have never had that. But to someone who has been set free from bondage, set free from incarceration, what I'm told is the feeling nothing short of euphoric. And that's the way that we should feel. Take heed to yourself. And then the last question that they ask is, where are you going? Well, before we go there, let's turn and read Titus. Titus 2, verses 11 through 14. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching us that, remember, we've been set free, denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in the present age, looking for the blessed hope and glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, zealous for good works. Both of those first 2 questions were contained in this passage as well. We have been set free, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and then purify for himself his own special people. So what is our purpose? Zealous for good works. Where are you going? Turn over to 1 Peter. Not too long ago, Tim brought us a lesson about our homeland. Very good lesson. Tim McPherson. Not to re-preach his sermon, which was very good, by the way, but we have to ask ourselves, where are we going? You know, Tim brought up the point that says the one thing that was a comfort to him was just that, I have a homeland. It came from the Celtic women who, you know, the Irish are very, very proud of their heritage. I have a homeland. Where are you going? Remember where you came from. Remember, what is your purpose? And remember where you're going. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. Think back, Deuteronomy 4. Moses was preparing the nation of Israel to enter the promised land. Take heed to yourselves. In Luke 21, Jesus was instructing in preparation for that day when he comes again. Take heed to yourselves. 1 Peter tells us all of that will be worth it. To an inheritance incorruptible, that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. So I would suggest, hopefully, that we've learned this morning that what we need to do to take heed to ourselves is we need to know, we need to examine, we need to control, and we need to improve ourselves. If you're not a Christian here this morning, the best way to improve yourself right now is to become one. And if you have become one, but the mirror is not reflecting as well as it should, your book is not being read as accurately, well, okay, maybe being read accurately, but maybe not as accurately as you would like it to be. Best way to improve yourself is to take care of that today as well. We all need to care enough about ourselves that we will save our own souls. Remember when we looked earlier at Mark 16:26? Let's go back to the book of Mark one last time. Another passage very familiar to all of us. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. But he who does not believe will be condemned. Wesley, I'm going to pick on you one more time, one last time. You have your choice, saved, condemned. Which one do you choose? Quick. Saved. It's a no-brainer, isn't it? We're talking about here in the Galatians class, you're going down a trail. You come to a T in the road. If you go left, it's going to be real easy to travel. It's going to be real easy to traverse. But at the end of it, you will die. Or if you go to the right, it's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be rocky. It's going to be steep. And, you know, you're going to wonder, it's going to push you every ounce of energy that you have. But you will live. Which one are you going to take? One last time to 1 Peter. In 1 Peter 3 and verse 21, there is also an antitype which now saves us, baptism. Not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God. All made possible through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You have a decision to make this morning. Hopefully you've been asking if I've done what I set out to do this morning, is to make us think about ourselves, who we are, what we should be doing. Hopefully you've been thinking about that. If you don't like what's staring back at you in the mirror, you need to take care of that. If you don't like what other people see in you, you need to take care of that. All of that can be done here this morning, right now. Won't you please come while all together we stand and sing.